October 15th, 2025. A quiet, unassuming town in southern France became the epicenter of an event that would defy every known law of medicine and physics. It was a day that challenged the fragile boundary between hatred and the divine. Amina Khalil, a 32-year-old woman, committed an act so visceral and shocking that it sent tremors through her entire community. But the true story isn't just about what she did, it is about the impossible aftermath. Immediately following her actions, her right hand began to burn, not from a chemical, not from fire, but from the inside out. There was no medical explanation, there was no natural cause, and there was absolutely no way to stop it. This isn't a simple story about religious division. It is a terrifying glimpse into what happens when the wall between the physical world and the spiritual realm wears dangerously thin. What you are about to hear will force you to question the very nature of reality. These events unfolded over 28 agonizing days, 4 weeks that shattered certainties and left even the most hardened skeptics trembling in the face of the unknown. Amina Khalil had arrived in France 7 years prior to these events. She and her husband Rashid had emigrated from Algeria, chasing the promise of stability and escaping the crushing weight of economic hardship. They found themselves in a quiet town near Lyon, a place where history was etched into the architecture, old stone churches standing shoulder to shoulder with modern apartment blocks, a visual representation of tradition and progress existing in an uneasy truce. Amina found work as a cleaning assistant at the local hospital. To the outside world, she was a ghost in the machine of daily life, quiet, diligent, and deeply private. Her colleagues saw her as polite but impenetrable. She wore her hijab with dignity, never proselytizing, yet letting her actions speak of a faith that was the bedrock of her identity. Rashid, a construction worker, was the lighter half of their equation, outgoing, quick to joke with his crew over mint tea. But their home, though clean and filled with reminders of a distant homeland, held a heavy silence. They had no children. It was an absence that those close to them said weighed on Amina like a physical burden, though she never gave it a voice. Beneath the surface of this mundane existence, a darkness was taking root inside Amina. It was a slow-growing bitterness, a rage without a singular target that expanded with every passing month. She began to fixate on symbols she had previously ignored. The crucifixes adorning the hospital rooms where she mopped floors, the ringing of church bells on Sunday mornings, which she began to perceive not as a call to prayer for others, but as a deliberate interruption of her sleep. And then there was the statue. In the Place de la République, the town's central square, stood a statue of the Virgin Mary. It had watched over the town since 1921, a memorial to the fallen sons of the First World War. For a century, it had been a backdrop for children playing and neighbors gossiping, but for Amina, the statue transformed into a focal point of obsession. She started altering her walking routes to avoid it, but in a town this small, all roads eventually force you through the center. Every glimpse of that stone face made her jaw tighten and her hands curl into fists. Rashid saw the shadow falling over his wife, but his attempts to comfort her were met with walls of silence. She felt rejected by the town, and that feeling was rapidly curdling into something volatile. On the evening of October 12th, Amina stood at her kitchen window, her eyes fixed on the distant square. The statue was barely a silhouette from that vantage point, but its presence loomed large in her mind. She was formulating a plan, an act of defiance she couldn't even fully articulate to herself. By the morning of the 13th, she called in sick, her first unscheduled absence in 3 years. After Rashid left for work, she didn't rest. She sat in her kitchen, staring at the plaster walls, her mind a whirlwind of humiliation and outsider status. She cataloged every way she felt the world had failed her, and she directed all that energy toward one inanimate object. Tuesday, October 15th, dawned crisp and cold. The square was dotted with the usual rhythm of life. Elderly residents on benches, a mother adjusting her child's blanket in a stroller. At 9:47 a.m., Amina entered the square. Dressed in her black abaya, she carried a plastic bottle in her right hand. To anyone watching, she looked like a citizen, perhaps coming to water the flowers at the statue's base. But the bottle did not contain water. That morning, with shaking hands and a mind screaming at her to stop, she had filled it with her own urine. Driven by a terrible determination, she capped it, hid it in a bag, and walked out the door before her conscience could intervene. Standing before the statue, the rage that had been eating her alive crystallized into a strange, cold calm. She felt she was about to balance a cosmic scale. As she approached the stone figure, her heart hammered against her ribs, deafening in her ears. She unscrewed the cap. For a split second, a flicker of doubt sparked in her mind, a question of purpose, but she extinguished it instantly. She raised the bottle and poured the foul liquid over the face and chest of the Virgin Mary. Dark streaks ran down the pristine white stone, pooling at the feet of the statue. For 3 seconds, the world held its breath. The birds continued to chirp, the traffic flowed, then the scream tore through the air. An elderly witness stood pointing, her voice shrill with shock. Heads turned. A man in a suit pulled out his phone to record. Amina stood frozen, the empty bottle still clutched in her hand. She waited for a rush of triumph, a sense of vindication. Instead, she felt a hollow, expansive coldness. And then the burning began. It started as a faint tingle in her right palm, the very hand that had held the bottle. Confused, she looked down. The tingle erupted into heat, and within seconds, the heat escalated into blinding, unbearable agony. The bottle clattered to the cobblestones. She gripped her right hand with her left, squeezing, trying to crush the pain out of existence. It felt as if she had thrust her hand into a blast furnace. Amina's scream shifted from a sound of protest to a raw, animalistic shriek of genuine torture. She collapsed to her knees, cradling the limb against her chest, tears blurring her vision. The pain obliterated every other thought. It radiated from her palm, shooting up her wrist and forearm like liquid fire. The crowd closed in. The elderly woman who had screamed now approached with caution. The man in the suit dialed emergency services. People asked if she had been bitten or stung, but as they looked closer, the mystery deepened. Her hand looked perfectly normal. There were no blisters, no redness, no chemical burns, no swelling. Yet Amina was writhing on the ground, sobbing in an agony that was visibly, undeniably real. When the ambulance arrived 8 minutes later, paramedics Julian and Sophie were baffled. They assessed her, expecting a fracture or a burn, but found flawless skin. They administered pain medication, but it was like throwing water on an oil fire. They tried cooling packs, but the moment the ice touched her skin, Amina screamed louder, claiming the cold made the burning worse. It was a medical paradox. How can flesh burn without fire? How can there be level 10 pain with zero injury? By the time the ambulance sped away, the town was already buzzing. A bucket brigade of citizens washed the statue, while the gossip network lit up. By noon, the narrative was set. The Muslim woman had desecrated the statue, and now she was being consumed by a mysterious affliction. At St. Catherine Hospital, Dr. Laurent Mercier, a veteran physician, conducted a meticulous examination. His notes painted a picture of impossibility. Patient reports maximum pain levels. No inflammation, skin temperature normal, no toxins, no nerve damage. Blood pressure spiked from stress, but physiologically, the hand was healthy. They brought in a neurologist, Dr. Simone Duboche, who ran extensive tests. Nothing. They escalated the pain management to morphine, the strongest weapon in their arsenal. It did nothing. Amina continued to scream, begging for relief, her voice raspy, her body drenched in sweat. Rashid arrived, terrified and confused. He found his wife curled in a fetal ball, whimpering. He demanded answers that the doctors simply didn't have. Dr. Mercier, stripping away his professional mask, admitted that in 23 years, he had never seen anything like this. By that afternoon, the story had leaked to the press. A local journalist published an article titled, "Woman Desecrates Religious Statue, Immediately Struck by Mysterious Affliction." The internet did what the internet does. It exploded. Religious groups claimed divine punishment. Atheists demanded a rational explanation. Community leaders called for calm. But inside room 412, Amina didn't care about the culture war raging outside. She only cared about the fire that wouldn't die. Night fell, wrapping the hospital in shadows. Amina lay exhausted, mentally shattered by 6 hours of relentless torture. Rashid sat by her side, reciting verses from the Quran, holding her unaffected left hand. At 11:30 p.m., the whimpering suddenly stopped. Rashid looked up, fearing she had lost consciousness. Instead, her eyes were wide, fixed on an empty corner of the room. She whispered, "Do you see her?" Rashid followed her gaze to the blank wall. "See who?" he asked. "The woman in blue," Amina replied, her voice trembling. "She is standing right there." Rashid felt the hair on his arm stand up. He tried to tell her it was a hallucination, a side effect of the drugs or the pain, but Amina was adamant. No, she is real. She is looking at me. It is the same face from the statue. Rashid stood, waving his hand through the empty air to prove nothing was there. Amina began to weep. A different sound now, one of deep, soulful sorrow. She is asking me why, she sobbed. She isn't angry. She is just sad. For 10 minutes, Rashid watched in helpless horror as his wife conversed with thin air. She apologized. She poured out her soul, confessing her feelings of alienation, her rage at being an outsider, her feeling that Allah had abandoned her. She confessed to the deep shame of her infertility. Finally, she fell into a fitful sleep. Rashid stepped into the hallway to alert the nurse, but as he returned to the chair, he couldn't shake a disturbing sensation. For a brief moment, while Amina spoke to the wall, he had felt a presence in the room, a weight in the air that defied explanation. The next morning brought no relief. The burning remained constant. A team of specialists, dermatology, rheumatology, psychiatry, descended on Amina. They ruled out everything. The psychiatrist, Dr. Rousseau, determined that while Amina was distressed, this wasn't psychosomatic. The mind can create pain, but not like this, not continuously, not at this intensity, without breaking. Meanwhile, the town square was transforming. People were gathering by the hundreds, bringing flowers and candles. A vigil had spontaneously formed. Father Antoine Moreau, the local priest, addressed the crowd, urging against judgment and praying for healing. But the media circus had arrived. News crews from Paris broadcast the story live. Was it a miracle? Mass hysteria? The digital world tore the story apart, using it as ammunition for political and religious arguments. Days passed. Amina's body was shutting down from lack of sleep. Dr. Mercier considered a medically induced coma just to give her respite. On October 18th, Father Moreau visited the hospital. Rashid was hesitant, but allowed the priest in. The priest sat gently by the bed. Amina, eyes hollow and red, accused his God of punishing her. "I don't believe God works that way," Father Moreau said softly. "Forgiveness isn't about religion, it's about truth." Under his gentle questioning, Amina opened up. She spoke of the microaggressions, the looks, the silence when she entered rooms, the failed fertility treatments, and the crushing pressure from her family. She admitted she felt abandoned by everyone, her homeland, her new country, and her creator. Father Moreau listened, then offered a suggestion that seemed impossible. "I think you need to return to the square, not to desecrate it, but to face what you did. Perhaps the pain won't stop until you do." On October 20th, defying all medical advice, Amina checked herself out of the hospital. She signed the discharge papers with a trembling left hand. Rashid pushed her wheelchair, her right hand clutched to her chest, the burning just as fierce as the moment it began 5 days earlier. They drove to the square, where the crowd had swelled. As Rashid helped her from the car, silence fell over the hundreds of people gathered there. Father Moreau stepped forward, parting the crowd to create a path. Amina walked. Every step was a battle against exhaustion and agony. She reached the statue, the serene face she had defiled, the face that had haunted her visions. She sank to her knees on the cobblestones. Tears streamed down her face as she raised her burning hand toward the stone figure. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she raised her voice. "I don't ask for forgiveness, I ask for understanding. I ask to be seen not as a symbol, not as an outsider, but as a person who is broken." She confessed to the crowd that she had projected her own pain onto the statue. She admitted that her hatred was a mask for her own suffering. She lowered her head to the ground, her body shaking with sobs. And then, the impossible happened. The switch flipped. The searing, furnace-like heat in her hand didn't fade gradually, it vanished instantly. One moment, absolute agony. The next, nothing. Amina gasped, sitting up. She stared at her hand. She flexed her fingers. She pressed her palm to her cheek. "It stopped," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "It stopped." The crowd erupted. Cheers, tears, prayers. Skeptics would later claim it was the release of psychological tension, but those who were there felt the electricity of something supernatural. Rashid embraced his wife, and Father Moreau placed a hand on her shoulder. The haunted look in Amina's eyes was gone, replaced by a profound peace. The aftermath was a frenzy of investigation. Amina returned to the hospital for a full workup. Dr. Mercier was dumbfounded. There was no trace of the condition. It was as if the last 5 days had never happened, biologically speaking. "I have no framework for understanding this," he admitted. Amina told him, "I think I was given a choice, to stay in my hatred or to release it. When I let it go, the pain could leave too." The Catholic Church launched an official inquiry, a process that would take years. Their preliminary report was cautious but clear. The events lacked a sufficient natural explanation. But the true transformation was in the community. On October 25th, an interfaith dialogue was held. Amina sat alongside an imam, a rabbi, and Father Moreau. She spoke with a new strength, admitting that her pain did not justify her cruelty. The imam affirmed that her actions did not represent Islam. The priest spoke of divine love transcending boundaries. The dialogue didn't solve everything, but it started something. Bridges were built where walls had stood. Amina and Rashid's marriage, forged in this fire, became stronger. They attended Mass. The priest attended prayers at the mosque. Months later, Amina gave one interview. When asked if God had punished her, she offered a perspective that silenced the room. "I don't believe God punishes us like humans do. The burning was a consequence of my own spiritual state. My hatred had become so intense it manifested physically. When I faced the truth, my body could heal." Scientific papers were written about neuroplasticity and the mind-body connection, attempting to rationalize the event. But the facts remained stubborn. A woman desecrated a statue, burned without fire, and healed instantly upon confession. The statue in the Place de la République still stands, now covered in flowers from people of all faiths. It has become a monument not to a specific religion, but to the possibility of reconciliation. So consider your own life. What pain are you carrying that you refuse to release? What hatred burns inside you, invisible to the world but scorching your soul? What apology have you failed to make? Amina Khalil's story isn't just about a miracle in a French town. It is a mirror. We all have our statues, symbols of our resentment and fear. We all have the capacity to desecrate, and we all have the capacity to heal. The burning in Amina's hand was real, but it was merely a symptom of a deeper fire. When she found the courage to extinguish the hatred within, the physical pain had no choice but to follow. The question remains for you. Will you let your burning consume you, or will you find the courage to kneel, face the truth, and finally let it go?